Subway is having a $6.49 deal on footlongs, on very few footlongs. In my area, $6.49. So I got falafel, pickle, mayo, banana pepper, and pizza sauce without the meat. I've never tried falafel before in Subway. I didn't know they had it. I think it's a bit tastier than that veggie patty that they have now. It's really good. It feels so quiet down here. I haven't really spent a lot of time in this room, and I'm trying to speak a little quiet because this house really echoes. And after I finished my Subway sandwich, a friend of mine texted and said, "Hey, do you want to come and visit my little studio set for my TV show?" And so I said, yeah, and I had to be there in half an hour. So dropped everything and went there, and it was kind of neat, very cool. And I sort of wanted to see what kind of setup he has to have a little TV show. I'm just curious to see what he does, because he really connects people. He's really good at interviewing people. He's very positive. I really resonate and gravitate towards this person. And so it was a great experience to be able to do that. And that's sort of what I think is cool about how the last 3 months I spent time mostly out and about, eating at restaurants, sitting in a coffee shop, meeting a friend and then sitting in their coffee shop, not really talking to too many strangers and things, not really having any bad interactions, but not having, like, if I was in Mania, I would probably meet a lot of people and they'd be talking to me and things. And so there was 3 months where I was kind of by myself and also avoiding my historical, relational, conditioning connections, which they saw as me ignoring them. And interestingly enough, what I'm trying to say is my energy has shifted in this last week or so, and I can totally tell because I feel like I can be at home, and I was deciding to be at home for the last couple days because I'm starting to feel like getting organized and researching a bit more on the computer. And a sign that my energy has shifted is I have this big long to-do list that I'm checking things off. Woo! And also, I've written down a bunch of stuff to talk about, and also in my notebook, I have a lot more to talk about, and I have stuff all over my desk that I want to talk about, so I have a lot to talk about. Whereas a few weeks ago, I remember saying to myself, this is really boring. I'm just sort of like, oh, I took these pills last night, I took these vitamins this morning, blah, blah, blah. So I've actually learned a lot by the fact that it's summer and I've been able to be out and about. I was spending time in the sun for a while, spending time walking, then sort of spending time not doing that much of anything. But I've definitely shifted. And I wasn't sure a few months ago if my troubled time started about mid-May or if it started when that kind of crisis heart poundy stuff was on June 20th. But I think it was actually mid-May, because mid-May to mid-June to mid-July to mid-August, it was mid-August. It's the 19th now, but it's probably been a week or so since I switched. So I would take it more as the mid-May mark. And then now, being mid-August, I'm starting to, well, it's more like a light switch. It's not like a gradual thing, really. But I had a couple hard weeks in May, and then I went to the island and had a couple good weeks, and then a couple challenging weeks. Came back, still kind of challenging, but overall, the 3 months from mid-May to mid-August, I was able to work. I didn't miss any work. I missed one dentist appointment. That's it. But it wasn't a crisis where I'm in the hospital and I'm missing things for a couple weeks. I'm starting to feel like I can plan a little bit more and actually go through with those plans. Like I made a hair appointment for Thursday. I'm going to try and eat raw oats the week I have the house to myself, and then donate blood hopefully the week after that. So those are the sort of things that I'm planning to do. I'm still in the 30-day abundance challenge with Steve Pavlina, and I'm finding it really helpful to listen to somebody talking about that on a daily basis, or listening to the recording. So it's kind of showing to myself that if I was someone like me, trying to get this was and were thing figured out, if I was someone like me, which I am, I feel like listening to somebody's journey or listening to how somebody processes things on a daily basis would get my mind possibly into processing things a little bit differently. And I've talked to myself a lot, and the point isn't believe this or believe that. It's sharing the process that I've used with myself that over the years has helped me slowly but surely. It's been over 2 years now that I've been talking to myself in this way. Haven't been hospitalized, whereas the 2 years before that, or 14 months before that, I was hospitalized 3 times. And these last few months, I've learned a lot about myself. And when I first started talking to myself, I remember that I would want to talk to myself before doing almost anything else. And now I have wanted to talk to myself tonight, but somebody texted me and said, hey, do you want to do this? And I'm like, see ideas and things to talk about. I'm going to go hang out with a real person. So I think that these 3 months have taught me to put people that I resonate with first. And I've been learning I think I started trying to learn again a few weeks before. I've been feeling like I'm sort of coming out of the negativity, which means that with all the energy I have, I don't feel like the energy of others can affect me so much. And so I'm feeling good about that. And like I said, I have a lot to talk about, and I'm not going to talk about it in any particular order per se, because that's usually how I do it. And I don't even really know where to start. But today, where could I start? I don't like to give details about people that I know right now, but what I would say or will say is that I lent my mini trampoline to somebody who has trouble with their lymphatic system, let's put it that way. And since the heart doesn't pump the lymph, it pumps blood. You need to pump the muscles and things and bounce to get the lymphatic system going. So I lent the trampoline, and I got a little video of that person bouncing on the trampoline, and it just really warmed my heart and made me feel really good that it could be helpful in some ways, because I looked up and rebounding is good for that, and I already do understand that. I've done a lot of health research over the years, raw foods and living foods, and so I'm going to also lend them. I found the DVD that came with the rebounder, which is about the immune system, and also this bounce before you jump, which is kind of dated and it's kind of lame, but why not? Oh, they're both from NEDAC. That's the rebounder I have. I have a good one, and I was given it as a gift from a very generous person, and now I'm lending it out, and I feel good about that. So I'm gonna take a peek at this one, because I can't remember what it's about, and lend that out. And The other thing I did was, I know somebody else who knows a little one that is having seizures. So I have quite a few brain books, and I was looking up some of the information and copying the relevant sections about seizures and things, and it does talk about ketogenic diet, blah blah blah. I'm not an expert, I'm just a resource. And then I also printed out this thing about crystal children and indigo children and star children. Now, why would I do that? I printed off a bunch of stuff about seizures and epilepsy and things, and one of them, it's quite detailed about the awful rigmarole that a parent of such a child would have to go through. You know, it's comparable to the awful rigmarole of somebody who gets diagnosed with a mental illness. Go to the hospital. You know, months later you stabilize on your medication, in quotes, and then, you know, maybe you're kind of semi-functional and blah. And it's the same thing with the kids that are put on drugs for seizures. They're falling asleep during the day. It just sounds awful. So the first couple pages were like this awful news, and I'm like, ooh, should I even give this out? But it paints a picture of the reality of it. But then, in terms of printing this thing out about the crystal children and star children, it's telling the story of how these children are special, and then some of them have telepathic abilities, and it said somewhere that, let me look. So, for example, from this thing I printed off from cywhelper.blogspot.com, they say, they're talking about crystal children. Because of the difference in brain chemistry, the crystal children tend to suffer from seizures and epilepsy more frequently. Physically, their brains do not look different, but they do have a different chemical balance to them. The chemical makeup, which is different, is a higher level of neurotransmitters, which create more neurons, and also an elevated level of serotonin. These special children, blah, blah, blah. What I'm trying to point out is, okay, there's these pages about epilepsy and seizures and pathology, but there's also another point of view, like crystal children, indigo children, star children. I know a child on the autism spectrum who now speaks very well, but had trouble, and there's a blurb about that in here saying their speech is said to be delayed because their first few years of life they're trying to communicate with their parents by way of telepathy. It's only later they realize their parents do not understand, leaving them to try to find a new channel of communication. That parents do understand, making their speech delayed. Crystal children are also said to be smarter than the average child. A more sensitive child who can show empathy and love better than the human race today. Blah, blah, blah. So, is it epilepsy or is it a special gifted child? Is it seizures? I don't know. My point is, for me, and having a mental illness diagnosis, I don't really think that it's that. The trouble is, being an adult, I sort of have to figure this stuff out for myself, and there's more people out there that think the way I do. I know that for sure. I just found one today, which I will talk about. So, for me, I like to look at things from a non-pathology type lens, so I want to do that for anybody that I give information about almost any kind of brain thing to. So I'm going to give this to that person. I might have to read all of it because the star children doesn't really apply, maybe. I don't know. And it could be kind of weird. I don't want to be too weird, even though I am very weird. So, and the other point about that is when I've switched into this extra energy mode, I have extra energy to do even more things for other people. Like, things come to mind. If somebody says something, I'm like, wow, there's something that I can share, there's something that I can do. So it's twofold. Wanting to share the specialness lens, or not special, but different, and having different capacities, and also having the energy to look at these things. And then also by looking at this for somebody else and reading this bit about the star children and how different areas of their brain are working. If a child could be born like that, the brain can also, I feel, mutate to use different structures midway through life. The brain isn't fixed. It's neurofluid. It's not even neuroplastic. So it can neurofluidly mutate to start to function in a different way, perhaps based on what's happening in that person's life and what's happening in all of humanity. So, yeah. And then, in my research that I was quickly looking up epilepsy and the different brain books that I have, like The Brain Diet, The GAPS Diet, different ones that I have that are about the brain in general and not only about so-called mental illness, in quotes. So when I was looking in this book, which is a great book, I saw this naturopath years ago, and I had chronic fatigue, like MS, like something weird that was awful. And I followed this program by seeing him and taking supplements and changing my diet according to what he said to do, and I felt 90% better in 5 months after feeling like hell for 5 years. So he's awesome for sure. And so I was looking in the index for epilepsy, and on page 617, so this is what I do. I look for clues. I look for little bits of my hypothesis, which changes and I don't exactly know what it is, but I know when I see a clue. And so I don't even know really what section this is in the book, but epilepsy is mentioned on this page. So that's how I looked at this page and read it. So I'll read you this little quote here. In 1998, a new type of medical research marker demonstrated that in the 5 human brains studied, all 5 showed development of new neurons in the hippocampus. These new brain neurons had to have originated from stem cells. Animal studies found stem cells inside the hippocampus. So I think it's part of neurology that there's no such thing as new neurons. That's the current belief. But in 1998, which was 20 years ago, they found that in the hippocampus there are stem cells that create new brain neurons in animal models. I think they might have confirmed this in humans too, because I've seen this. This book is a little bit older now. So to continue the quote, these stem cells divide constantly. Some become identical daughter cells, while some migrate and become nerve cells. So this next line is what interested me. Exercise, creative play, and learning help increase the growth and survival rate of these new nerve cells. Injuries such as stroke or epilepsy can dramatically increase their replication rate. So it's kind of saying that if somebody has an injury to the brain, like stroke or epilepsy, that will build new neurons because the old ones are damaged. So it's a signal to build new neurons. Well, what other kind of stress or trauma to the brain signals growing new neurons? I feel that if somebody's traumatized emotionally or physically, that is possible, that it could be a possible trigger to also generate new nerve cells. And it's really interesting because it says that exercise, creative play, and learning help to increase the growth and survival rate of these new neurons. What's interesting about that is a person who is in so-called mania, they do a lot of running around, they do a lot of exercise, maybe not purposefully, but I was very active. I was very creative and playful, so creative play and learning. I was always learning. Mania to me is a hyper-learning state. The brain is restored to learning for itself from its own subjectivity and its own creative perception based on what it sees in the moment. So it can create quite different behavior. But what I'm saying is that if these three things are a big part of what is happening when somebody is in so-called mania, like the creative play was very playful, very creatively playful. Creatively playful in one's perceptions. That's why one is very vocal and has a lot of new vocabulary and is poetic and metaphorical, and one's playing with words and it's creative, and that is a learning process. The brain is in a hyper-learning state in that it's processing so much information, and that what I'm trying to say is that that could be something that is concurrent with the new nerve cells that are growing, that I believe is happening in so-called mania. There is, I feel, a burst of new growth of neurons. So this is only talking about in the hippocampus in this blurb here. And again, I'm not talking about writing a factual book here. I'm talking about finding meaning in some of the science and making an analogy or making a little hypothesis based on clues from divergent fields. And that's something that somebody with this type of brain, so-called, quote, bipolar, that's one of the capacities that we have, is to make meaning for ourselves. And I wrote down somewhere that if I wasn't diagnosed as being mentally ill or crazy, I don't know if I would be spending my time looking for clues in books about health and the brain. I'd probably be out having fun, exercising, and being creative and playful. But what I've realized recently is that, and this is something different than I was saying to myself before, I've realized recently that I need to possibly, I don't know, it's another experiment, go back to words, extrapolating words. First there was the word. Because the trouble is, I feel, partly, is when somebody gets in the groove or in the wave of extreme states of consciousness, so-called mania. I'm only calling it that for convenience because people like me are trying to build a bridge of understanding. So I'm only using that word. So if somebody watches this, they're not like, well, what is this person talking about? I'm talking about what medical science would call mania, but I don't think it's a medical problem at all, really. When it's objectified and the lens of that knowledge is overlaid onto what somebody is presenting as, then you can make anything into a medical problem. Like, look at the big book, the DSM, or anything that goes wrong with the body, it's a medical problem, and then there's some kind of drug. And they can be helpful for sure in certain times and places. But what I'm saying here with this blurb, I think it's very important to show how survival rate of new nerve cells in general probably is increased by learning, creative play, and exercise. And I think the thoughts that we've been programmed with and conditioned with growing up through education and family and media, those are just old tracks. And in order to have new thoughts and ideas, we have to, I don't like have to, but we need to learn. And if we learn, it kind of makes sense that a possible new neuron would grow or a new connection, which requires movement and growth of the nerves. It requires some kind of fluidity. So, point being, what I just said, plus when I look up something for somebody else, I often find some of my own extrapolations, like in this book, which I think was a very important clue. So when we're playful with words and we're moving about and we're learning for ourselves, that's going to help to stabilize whatever new neurons are growing. And hey, I'm not going to be a scientist and spend the next 10 years researching that. I'm going to make the extrapolation. I'm going to make the meaning for myself, and that's meaningful to me, to make some kind of meaning for myself and to show that there's some kind of intelligent process going on here. I don't think all of this is a mistake. And to go with that, I signed up for a webinar called Process-Oriented Approaches to Altered States and Extreme States of Consciousness. And I got an email today that said that there was a problem with the recording. I couldn't watch it live. I had to get ready for the day, and I thought, well, there's going to be a recording, so I'll watch it later. There was a problem with the recording, so they sent the PowerPoint slide. And the PowerPoint is 70 slides, so I'm not going to talk about it. But I didn't really know what process-oriented approach meant. And apparently this man, John Harold, has a master's in process-oriented approach. So I didn't know it was like a master's level type thing. But I'll just move this so I can look at the slide. So this is quoting one of his slides, not to copy, but he gives a shout out to anyone whose behavior and language don't make sense to those around them, to anyone experiencing a reality noticeably different from the one the majority believes is happening, to anyone who's being told they shouldn't trust themselves, that they're mentally ill for having such experiences, to anyone who's looking for better ideas than, quote, mental illness. And so that's one of the very first slides. And I'm like, okay, this guy resonates with me for sure. He is trying to do the same thing that I've done. He says, to anyone who's looking for better ideas than mental illness. You know, that's what I've been doing with myself for the last 2 years. I've been exploring all these different ideas with myself. I've been looking for these ideas. I've been creating some of the ideas myself. I've been extrapolating little bits of science to my ideas. And it's not a fully formed thing, and that's why it's disjointed. And there's a clue somewhere and I talk about it. And then there's another clue somewhere and I talk about it. But I don't necessarily link those clues because I've already forgotten about the clues from 2 years ago. So the point about this for me is to just keep exploring the clues. And I feel that through maybe one day talking or listening to this John Harold guy, who he has a bunch of videos on his website that look pretty good. Well, they look really good. And a lot of other people they're doing this sort of work in their own way. So the more we start talking to each other or sharing videos and watching them, the more we start building this whole network of other ideas that we can listen to and see if they resonate. And I don't even think it's about trying to memorize them all and create some big hoopla out of it. It's more a matter of remembering what we've experienced and trusting in our experience and trusting ourselves. And we go for help from the system often because we're afraid. But the more we understand, and the more we have the capacity to understand, I feel the fear gets less and less. That's what I feel in my own experience. And so his website is johnherold.net. That's JOHNHEROLD.net. And a few things I wrote down from his slide presentation that are funny here. Obviously, I didn't hear what he said about each slide, but one slide said, quote, "Be a little more psychotic all the time." And I've said, embody your mania. That's what I've said for myself. And he also said, something valuable is trying to make itself known always. And I feel that's true. And I think there's so much to say, I don't even know what to say first. And then he also said, taken literally, I was seen as dangerous. Taken metaphorically, I could be understood. And that was interesting because I've thought about how we go into a metaphoric state of consciousness, seeing things in terms of simile and metaphor and all these different lenses, but we aren't approached metaphorically. We aren't approached as if we're in a state of metaphor. And I remember sharing one time that Ron Unger said that we often speak in metaphor when we don't have the words for something. So we have the words for all that we know as humanity or think we know, but we don't have the words for what is outside of that. So we often have to make metaphors. And for me, the process that I'm in with myself here is not only making those metaphors with that unknown, because I'm not as connected with it per se, I don't think, but making extrapolations to some of the other brain science that happens that's not necessarily about, quote, mental illness, but it extrapolates to it. It kind of explains some of it. One can take what they're studying in human potential and overlap that in the ways that they do overlap with the experience of so-called bipolar. And I wrote down that in a way, in the normal, quote, state of consciousness or consensus state of consciousness, we're living in a bad metaphor. And what I mean by that is that state of the brain is almost a metaphorical state because it's not actual. We're raised to think that status matters, that position matters, that power matters, that aggression matters, that winning at somebody else's expense matters, that the way we're educated matters. Like, so many things matter, but they're human constructs. So in a way, they're metaphors. They're not really literally how life is. And I feel like when we go into those altered states and those metaphoric type states of consciousness, when we have access to new words and our brain is trying to figure it out, we're actually trying to figure out how the universe really works, how we're really interconnected. We're not divided and separated. And when we think we're separated, we act based on conflict rather than dialogue and trying to understand. So if we really knew that somebody else was literally us too, not our body, but our consciousness is the same, then we would operate in a different way. So I feel like those altered states of consciousness, those extreme states of consciousness, are trying to get the brain more congruent with how things actually are. That we don't have these separate minds. It's not like my brain evolved in isolation. As Krishnamurti would say, we all have the same brain. It's the same human brain. It's gone through the same evolution. It's the same brain. And I've realized that a lot of the stuff that's weird that happens can actually be partly explained by the fact that we don't exist in isolation, we exist in relationship. Somebody was telling me today that they woke up once when their dad was having a stroke. Like 2 minutes into the stroke, they were awake and there. Because we're in relationship, so something is signals in that relationship and comes into the brain. Like, we're not separate. We're not these isolated things. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is, what we see as reality, like how we think the world is, and how, you know, all this media crap and things going on in the world that are just terrible, that are over-reported, and that's not really how it is. And the other thing with that, when I was talking about how John Harold said, be a little more psychotic all the time. And I talk to myself a lot about embodying one's mania. I actually feel when we embody our mania and gesture in that way that is congruent with how human consciousness is really connected, that makes people very uncomfortable, and it gives us a way. So if I'm like really happy for no reason, people know me, they're like, oh, what's up with her? Whereas if I take that energy and I allow it to change my brain cells, and I allow it to give me access to new languaging and understanding of the way things work, and then share it in dialogue instead of sharing it in gesture. Before I might have said, oh, you know, gesture your way to that space, but I don't know if that's the right approach. For example, if I was in psychosis or really afraid, when I was on the island by myself, I saw the subtle gestures that wanted me to like maybe call for help or maybe be angry at something, but there was nothing there. There was nothing. So I could see the energy wanting to do that, but there was nothing there to act on. So then it couldn't act, and it just dissolved. So it's like a subtle hook. And in the same way, I think we can get hooked into thinking that the world is already that wonderful way, and gesturing in the happy manic way prematurely. I don't know if this is true, but like, for example, or finding the right environment to be that way, because right now I'm at home and I've been kind of like standoffish with who I'm living with. So if all of a sudden I was different, I don't know how they would feel. But part of me feels that these historical figures in my life, based on memory and what I did years ago as a teenager, and blah, 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 like hearing these old things that never enter my mind, there is some anger about certain things, which, anyway, what I'm trying to say is, these people don't, like, deserve, that's not the right word. They don't deserve to have a manic person around. So in this environment, I will be sort of stoic. I will keep to my words and I'll share them with myself. I'll talk with myself. And I'll save the gestures for others when I go to California, when even doing a bit of research for people that I know with certain challenges or something like that. Channeling the energy into that versus being like, whoa, everything's fine, because, you know, everything isn't fine. Some people I know are suffering. That's not fine. So for me to be super ecstatic for no reason is kind of inappropriate. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm just saying, if I was to go totally manic, which I don't think I would now, then it would give me away. And then, so I don't want to give myself away. I don't want, but the other thing is, I'm not being super clear here because I've written a lot lately, today and the other days, and I don't know how to get to it all, and it doesn't matter. But if we don't act, if there's some kind of understanding, there is a change in the brain. This is what I want to say. So if I act all happy, I'm like, oh, look, like mirror my behavior because I'm so happy, and other people might mirror that a little bit through the mirror neuron system, mimicry. I could try to change the world through mimicry, getting people to mimic the mania. But the other way to change the world is covert. It is understanding, which changes the brain. And when it changes my brain, it changes everyone's brain. A little bit. Just a little bit. So I might think, well, I need to show these people, these 10 people around me by gesture. Or when I understand and it changes my brain slightly, it changes everyone's brains too a little bit. I don't know if it's the ones around me or it ripples outwards or what. We all have the same brain. So I think there is a shift. So if I learn something, I don't necessarily have to act it out. Because I think that gives it away more. So this is more of a covert way of creating change. Like, I think me talking to myself creates change in the whole field. Maybe it creates change in me in such a way that one day I'll speak to other people who are doing a similar thing, and I'll have been talking to myself and thinking about things in different ways from different perspectives for many years, and so have they, and then we can talk about our perspective. But I also feel that it changes the whole field somehow, giving voice to these things, and if I share it, it'll be a different kind of change. But for example, I couldn't get a hold of my brain twin for a day or two, and he was sending me email forwards about like Eckhart Tolle and stuff in the middle of the night. So I knew, I don't think he slept. And then I couldn't get a hold of him. And he said he called me, and then he didn't. I'm like, And so when I finally talked to him last night, he said that he went into like a bit of a paranoia and did something. And he was afraid that maybe his parents would get mad and kick him out. He lives with his parents right now. Hasn't always, but does at this moment. And he was saying that his parents, like, put their hand on his head and said something like, don't worry, it's okay. Like, it sounded like they were really sweet. Like, he didn't go into tons of details. And then he said they even laid down beside him and said, you know, if you sleep better in your own room, go ahead, and blah, blah. But it just sounded like they were really compassionate and kind. And he was kind of afraid and things, and then he was able to go and sleep, and he maybe took extra meds or something, I don't know. But it just sounded like a totally different flavor of what I've heard before, like before he might end up in the hospital. So even though I didn't really pass on any of my knowledge of what I do to keep myself safe on my own without someone being so kind as to put their hand on my head and tell me it's okay, he was able to have that experience. And I don't know how out of hand it got and if it's fully back in hand, but I feel like, I don't know, I don't feel like I had something to do with that, but him and I have talked a lot, and you know, maybe people are going to start having people be more understanding when this stuff happens, and be more compassionate, and just be like a safe energy for this fear to move through. And I was really surprised and kind of heartwarmed by what he shared. And he's not fully out of that state yet, so I don't know if he realizes that. But when I said, oh, that's really sweet, actually, comparing to what I've heard in the past, then, yeah, I don't know, I just thought, oh, wow, that's a change. And, yeah. So, also, so the slideshow is really good. And then John Harrell's website, he has a page called Services. And I think it's really cool that he says, if you go to johnharold.net/services, he says, warning, my views are not mainstream. Forget what you've seen on TV about this thing called mental illness. I use a different framework informed by my own experience as a psychiatric patient, as well as my master's degree in process work. I employ a non-pathologizing approach, one that does not assume illness. And he has, he said, I believe that by leaning toward, not away from disturbing experiences, we not only make meaning of an experience, but we make it less disturbing. And he says other things. I don't want to read his whole page. You can easily go and read it, but I just think it's very well laid out. And even though I personally don't have a master's degree in process work, I've been doing my own process, which I sort of called self-dialogue, because I don't have someone like this, John Harold. So I could be employing his services, but I've been talking with myself and doing my own thing, which might not be as effective, but it's definitely more cost effective. And yeah, he says, I strongly believe unusual sensations, altered realities, and big moods are purposeful, meaningful experiences. So yeah, his slideshow is really good. I'm sure all of his talks on his website under presentations are good. I feel like it's possible that one day I'll be able to do maybe something similar, like, I don't know, get some training. I really like what Ron Unger does, and this guy, John Harold. Sometimes it fascinates me how people had their intense crisis start later than me, and they have this like really nice website, and they're doing presentations, and I know why I'm not doing that yet, but there are people who are out there really providing benefit and value for people by saying, hey, it's not necessarily pathology. And that's what I'm saying with myself, but I'm doing a different method. I am doing self-dialogue. I'm going to keep going it'll probably be at least 3 years that I do this before I share. Because I have my reasons, and I'm learning a lot, and I feel like if I shared, that would skew what I'm learning for myself in my own process. And I do feel like people are able to pick up on what I'm saying to myself, even if I haven't shared it. Like, my understanding of how consciousness works, I've probably gone into it a lot, but I know saying these words out loud, even if no one, quote, can hear me, the universe can hear me. The algorithm of the whole cosmos can hear me. My brain can hear me, and everyone has the same brain. So to some extent, all brains are hearing this somewhat. And if I'm able to stabilize in, the growth of the new neurons that I talked about, and using different brain structures, which was talked about in the Crystal Children thing that I was reading. It says they're using different structures of their brain. So, hey, what it's saying is there are different structures that can be used. And this is something I wrote down to myself, is we're not using our brains. There's nobody there using the brain. Like, the universe uses our brains. Human thought constructs use our brains. We don't use them. We're being used by a system of thought that is programmed into us, and we act according to that. And altered states are trying to change that program and release us from the prison of that, and allow us to be free to look and perceive creatively for ourselves without the projection of thought. So the thoughts that are going in our head are like a projection. It's just being projected. There's no projector. There's not a self that's projecting this. It's just thinking naturally projects and then makes that very small, tiny, insy-binsy bit of the whole field of light and energy and vibration that's around us. It makes that little bit salient. So we think, wow, that person's such and such. When we could have been looking over there at the flower, like thought is projecting. So I wrote down that when mania comes in, or that energy, it's like turning on the lights. We feel like we're awake. But the trouble is, and what makes it challenging, at first at least, is we forget to smash the projector. So imagine we're watching a movie in the dark on a projector. That's the equivalent of moving in life according to thinking. And we think that projection is real. We think the movie on the projector is real. And then when the energy of so-called mania comes in, lights are on. And we look around and we could have realized that the movie was being projected on the side of a rock. And we're actually in paradise. Like there was this projector set up in paradise, in heaven on earth. And we're sitting there watching this projection on this rock. And then the lights come on. We see the beautiful paradise. But we forget that the projector's still there. And we forget to smash it. And the projection is thought. It's not my thought. There's no my thought. It's a whole human pool of thought, and we've been conditioned with certain bits through our experience. And there's no thinker thinking thoughts, but there's thought going on, and by virtue of it going on, it projects, and it thinks that it knows something about the world. And so perception, that isn't even perception. It's like conditioning. It's like being hypnotized and half asleep. When our brains are operating in that projection mode, we're kind of half asleep, and the light comes on. We can see so much more of actuality, the heaven on earth, and then that perception of all that new information moves us in different ways. We're like, oh, what's over here? What's over there? What's here? Just like me today, I was like, I've been in this room, not as much, but I have been in the morning. I can't see anything in here. Like, I see my vitamins, I take them in the morning, then I leave. And so today, being home, it's like, oh look, I have, I moved my essential oil diffuser in here. I'm like, oh, make it smell nice in here. And then I've made my ion machine filter the air into here, so I have more oxygen. And I did my laundry, and I got the hair out of the drain in my bathtub so it drains properly. I cleaned the tub, I cleaned the toilet, I cleaned the sink, I vacuumed the floor. I did something for work. I texted a bunch of people. Like, all of a sudden I have access to so many more gestures because I'm able to see what's around me. And not only just see it, but see the meaning of it and see what I can do with it. And it's not even I do it, because like I had this list of stuff to do and I was just sort of doing parts of it, but not like, oh, I'm going to do this first and that second or whatever. So when the light comes back on, this energy, one is able to see so much more and thus behave in a different way, because we're able to act on everything that's around us. What's actually there, not a projection, it's actually there, versus acting based on what we're projecting and thinking is there, which is usually something about some kind of psychological human construct, which isn't even real. Like the self, anything that we think about ourselves psychologically isn't real. It's part of the program, it's part of the algorithm where we act separately. And so that was something else I was going to say. I remember a long time ago talking about how this whole mental health thing is kind of like the weather. You know, there's storms, there's sunshine, there's rain. So the moods or whatever, I don't know what moods are. It's kind of like the weather. So I was thinking that this difference between when I feel like I'm sort of surrounded by historical things coming at me, like memories and people coming at me with their memories about stuff. And I can't really see anything, like I'm stuck in this history, and it's a lower energy state because it's based on the past, and the past is no longer here. So the brain has to lower its energy in order to think about something that's not here. If we're in contact with something that's actual, it energizes the brain because we can actually do something. We can participate with it. So the brain goes, it's in a historical state. And then this last week or so, that was a 3-month time. And this last week or so, it has changed into more of a creative state, a perceptive state, an actual state. And that's higher energy. And I was thinking that's kind of like the seasons. So I could think, oh, I'm no longer in a low mood. I wasn't depressed, but I was probably resisting certain interactions and knowing they wouldn't go the best because I was in a more of a negative state. And, you know, it's sort of like hibernation. For 3 months, I wanted to hibernate. Or it's like the 3-month of winter when not much is blooming. You know, you can put all the energy and nutrients in the soil that you want, but if there's no sunshine, nothing's going to happen really. So it's just not the season. You can sow the seeds, but then nothing's going to happen. So the thing is, we wouldn't say to a bear, don't hibernate. So for me, I'm the type of person who sort of hibernates for a while, because when the brain is in this historical mode, it's kind of hysterical because there's nothing it can do about any of this stuff. And it seems that those who seem to know this individual want to make me as the old sort of historical trajectory. They want to restore that history, that continuity of who I am, who they think I am. And I know I'm not that, and that's part of what makes me manifest as angry in those, or kind of annoyed or short in those type of interactions. Because, like, you don't know me. I don't know me. Like, get lost. But now I don't really feel like that because I'm in creative perception, so I'm not focused on these inner memories that aren't real. And I wasn't even thinking about the memories, but it's like a state where the brain is lost in history and there's nothing that can be done about it. So in a way, I manifest as kind of doing nothing because it's mirroring the state of the brain. So I kind of learned these last few months how to get really good at doing nothing and enjoying it. Not being like when one can surrender to doing nothing when the brain is in this season of history, you know, now it's changed into the season of mystery. It's like, wow, everything's mysterious, everything is interesting. And now I can look at these things and find extrapolation and analogy and making little hypotheses that I likely will never test myself because I can speak 2 million words, but I can't make studies out of all of that. My point is that we can learn from our own subjectivity. We can have creative perception. What's there, we look at it and it will create meaning. But if we're projecting information from the past as thought, it's meaningless. It's old. It's boring. You know what? I don't know what boredom is. I don't remember the last time I was bored. It was many, 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 many years ago, at least 10. So, yeah, it's kind of like seasons. So we wouldn't say to a bear, don't hibernate. And knowing my seasons, I can hibernate appropriately and go into this season of the brain is just taking a rest. It can't be in that high energy all the time. And just like how they say with working out your muscles, you have to rest. So the brain might be able to work its neurons and grow for months, like 5 months, but then it seems it needs to take a 3-month rest. And I believe my brain really grows. It experiments with using new structures. It connects new structures. It's neural fluid, and it also can die back. And I feel like one of the reasons why I speak the way I do is because I'm speaking from my brain cells' perspective. My brain cells are telling me what to say about themselves. And they can do that if we tune into that. So, yeah, I feel like my brain is sort of like summertime when it has the energy, it's learning and growing and all this newness and wonderfulness. And then winter comes and it all starts to die back. We don't call the seasons bad. Well, sometimes we do. We say we don't like winter. But if we remove the like and dislike from it, it can be a different experience. I really don't like winter, and I'm going to get the heck out of here before it shows up. But I've learned to be okay with the winter season in my brain, which this year happened to be in summer. So that was helpful because I could be outside doing nothing. So that's really long-winded. I'm going to stop here for a second and talk more about something else.